Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on the path to amplifying allyship. We're so excited to have you here with us today, and I'd like to thank each and every one of you for taking the time to engage in this important conversation. Allyship is not just about standing alongside your fellow coworkers, it's about actively listening, learning, and taking intentional steps to drive change. In the workplace, true allyship means more than words. It's about fostering a culture where everyone feels seen, valued, supported, regardless of their identity or background. Today, we'll explore what it means to be an effective ally, how we can encourage allyship at all levels, and the role we all play in creating inclusive spaces where people from all walks of life can thrive. Whether you're a business leader looking to influence change from the top, an employee committed to fostering inclusion in your team, or someone simply eager to learn more about DEI in the workplace, this discussion is for you. Please make sure that you're using the chat box to engage the panelist and moderator today. We will accept questions from both the chat box and the Q&A box, so enter your questions and our moderator will work them into the program as they navigate this conversation. The success of our events would not be possible without the amazing commitment from our sponsors. It is their generosity that allows us to provide you with free and accessible resources. Today, we extend our gratitude to our sponsors, our platinum sponsor, Dow, and our bronze sponsors, Michigan Bankers Association, Michigan Bankers Association Workers' Compensation Funds, and CATA. Your contributions play a pivotal role in our ability to empower employees and employers across the state, and for that, we deeply appreciate you. Together, we're making a meaningful impact, and your support is very instrumental in that. Now I will turn it over to our moderator, Marcia Black-Watson from the Michigan Energy Workforce Development Consortium, who also happens to be a close friend and colleague of the Michigan Chamber. I'm so grateful to have her at the helm of this conversation and leading the way today. So Marcia, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Becky. And good morning, everyone. I'm Marcia Black-Watson, Director of the Michigan Energy Workforce Development Consortium. It's an employer-led collaborative established almost 16 years ago now. The consortium, as Becky said, is housed in and supported by the Michigan Chamber Foundation, and we really appreciate our partnership with the Chamber. So just a little bit about the MEWDC. It is an industry-led partnership. We have more than 50 representatives, not only of industry, but also workforce, secondary and post-secondary education, government agencies, and nonprofits that are focused on underrepresented populations. We all work together to identify and to address current and future workforce issues that are really crucial to building and sustaining Michigan's energy industry. Our ultimate vision is to have the Michigan energy industry adequately staffed with a qualified and diverse workforce, and that's going to enable us to provide a safe and efficient state of energy across the state. So, diversity is one of 4 of our primary focus areas, and we develop and implement collaborative strategies benefiting multiple companies across career awareness, career exploration, recruitment, education and training, and retention. The discussion today is of great importance to the work of the Michigan Energy Workforce Development Consortium, as I'm sure it is for all of you that have joined us today. I attended the first 2 sessions of this year's DEI series, and they were both so informative and thought-provoking. We're going to have more of that today. And I want to thank the Michigan Chamber for really allowing me the opportunity to moderate this conversation with our very special guest, Mandis McAllister. Mandis is Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Manager at Warner Norcross and Judd, LLP. There, she leads DEI programs and initiatives, including the DEI Action Committee and employee resource groups. She also co-chairs Mosaic, an employer resource group for BIPOC firm members, and is dedicated to fostering a more inclusive workplace. Mandis holds a BS in political science from The Ohio State University, is a 2023 Crain's Grand Rapids Business 40 Under 40 honoree, and serves on a number of boards, including Arbor Circle, Comprehensive Therapy Center, and the National Black MBA Association's Greater Michigan chapter. So I want to welcome Mandis. So Mandis, before I kick off with our little fireside chat today, I want to give you an opportunity to provide some additional information about your work, about your company, and how it has prepared you for our discussion this morning on the path to amplifying allyship.
Thank you so much. I would love to do that. And thank you all for having me. I'm thrilled to be in this conversation with you today, Marcia. And thanks to the Michigan Chamber for inviting me here today. So yeah, let's talk a little bit about Warner. So Warner, Norcross and Judd is a law firm headquartered in Grand Rapids, Michigan. We have 9 offices across the state of Michigan and about 230 very talented and very smart attorneys that service our clients across all different types of practice groups, everything from litigation to family law, of course, corporate and business practices. And I've been at Warner for 6 years, which for my millennials, y'all know that's like I always joke that like 6 years is like 20 years in millennial time. And so it's a wonderful, wonderful place to work. I am the first person to ever hold my role as DEI manager, which is something that I am incredibly proud of. And I'm really thrilled to be doing this work, to be doing it at Warner with so many talented people and colleagues who really care about the work of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I'm just really blessed that I get to do that work every single day.
Awesome. So I'm looking forward to our conversation. I'm going to get started with sort of our kickoff question. But I'm going to date myself just a little bit, but that's okay. Mandis, I just attended my 45th high school reunion.
Wow.
And
Congratulations. That's awesome.
thank you. Yes. I worked co-op as a senior in high school, meaning that I've been in some type of a workplace for really more than 46 years. And so, regarding our topic today, while I am certainly familiar with the term ally, all right, but I was not familiar with the concept of workplace allyship until really hearing about this event. So, could you start us off by really defining what is an ally in today's workplace? What does it mean?
Sure. So I'm going to start with maybe like a spicy take or an unpopular opinion.
Okay.
So
Okay.
I owe so much of like what I've learned in diversity, equity, and inclusion to Jennifer Brown, who is a DEI thought leader and strategist, and she has her own consulting company. So shout out to Jennifer Brown and everyone at Jennifer Brown Consulting. But she has a saying, and she says that you're not really an ally unless someone from the community with whom you're trying to ally calls you one. And so everyone is always just an inspiring ally until, you know, someone from a community says that you're an ally. So some folks may disagree. I'm not really here to say, you know, whether I agree with that or not, but it always just kind of strikes home the point to me that being an ally is not a title that you kind of anoint yourself with. You don't just wake up and say, you know what, I'm an ally. And I think that Becky really nailed it in the opener where she talked about being an ally as something that you do. It's an action. And it's the same whether you're inside of the workplace or you're outside in the broader society. And so I really define ally or allyship in the workplace as someone who works alongside their colleagues, particularly those with marginalized identities with whom they don't share those identities. And they leverage their power and their privilege to provide consistent and visible support towards the ongoing effort of equity in the workplace. We talk a lot about the fact that, you know, you said you were dating yourself a little bit with your long tenure and your long career, and I think that that's great. But we know that the workplace, as it was not designed with everyone in mind. When we're thinking about bringing diverse folks into the workplace, we know that that means that it's going to require us to maybe reimagine some of the systems that have been in place that might not work for everybody. And so an ally is a partner in that work as we think about dismantling barriers or removing obstacles from folks who are coming into the workplace and trying to achieve success and their fullest potential. And so that's what I think of when I think of allyship or an ally in the workplace.
So I love that phrase you use, a partner in the work, because the work that I do is all about partnerships. You're not successful without that partnership. Um, I've had some really phenomenal mentors and champions during my career, just phenomenal. So, based on how you've defined ally, is ally really the same thing as a mentor or a champion, or is there a difference in the roles?
I think that that's a really good question. I think that I've come to believe that mentorship and sponsorship is a tool that you can use
Mhm.
in your allyship journey. So, but it's not really the same thing. So when we think about mentorship, we think of an individual who is more senior, usually, because we know that sometimes there's reverse mentorship, but someone who's more senior who has experience or an expertise that they lend to someone who is just starting out in their career, maybe at a different spot. It's a one-on-one relationship and it's kind of personal. A sponsor or a champion is someone who speaks your name in rooms that you're not in. So they're really lending their social capital towards another person to say, I'm behind this person, give this person an opportunity. And so mentorship and sponsorship are two very useful tools that you can use as an ally in the workplace, but
Mhm.
it's not the only one or the only two. And I think that the subtle difference between allyship is that it's not really a one-to-one relationship the way
Okay.
that it is when you're sponsoring someone or you're mentoring someone and you're championing someone. It is a commitment that you're making to an entire community, and it's going to look different in every setting. The way that you might have to speak up in support of women in your organization one day, and the way that you might have to speak up and to your HR department to say, hey, that I don't know that this policy that we've instituted is inclusive of all families or all partnerships, right? So allyship just takes on a subtle twist where it's your partnership with an entire community rather than your one-on-one relationship with an individual.
All right. So if I look down, I am paying attention, but I am taking copious notes. And so I hope our attendees, I know you're learning something already. And don't forget, put your questions in the chat or in the QA, and we will address those further on into our discussion. Um, so Ally uses um, personal privilege to support colleagues that may be from marginalized communities or populations. So, can you unpack a little bit that term personal privilege or provide examples of personal privilege? What is that?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And privilege, like many other words and phrases, sometimes even I feel like DEI has
Right.
become a tricky phrase to use, which
Mhm.
is, as a DEI
Yeah.
practitioner, it's like, oh, but privilege sometimes can be a dirty word, and it's really not. It's privilege is not about saying that an individual has not had to overcome barriers in their life. We all have stories that we can tell of obstacles
Absolutely.
that we've had to overcome in our lives, barriers that we've encountered. If the old folks used to say at church, keep living. You know what I mean? If you haven't had to overcome a barrier, keep living, and
Right.
I'm sure that you will.
Right.
So
Right.
privilege is not that. Privilege is saying that in a particular area or aspect of your identity, that identity did not produce additional barriers that you had to overcome. So I'll use myself as an example.
Okay.
I am a Black woman. I am able-bodied. I do not have a disability. Excuse me. I do not have a disability. I am a heterosexual woman partnered with a man.
Hmm.
So when I want to walk down the street with my husband and hold his hand, I usually don't have fear for my physical safety when I do that. I don't generally have a fear that the place that I live in, the state that I live in, is going to pass a law that that impinges on my right, at least not in terms of infringes on my right, at least not in terms of my partnership with my husband. And so my orientation has not erected barriers to my safety or my longevity or my access to rights that may be the case for folks that I'm in community with who are in queer relationships or who are in the LGBTQ plus community. And so my sexual orientation is an area of privilege for me. My status as a person without a disability is also an area of privilege for me. I usually, when I come to work, I do not have to think about, or I go into a building that's unfamiliar, I don't have to think how I'm going to access the building or if there's going to be an accommodation that's available for me or a flight of stairs that I have to take. And so that's an area of privilege for me. And so what I tend to tell folks, and this is kind of a mind-bending exercise, but think about the aspects of your identity that you think about the least. So for some folks, it could be their racial identity or their gender or their physical ability. And once you identify those areas, that's probably an area of privilege that you're operating in. And it's not necessarily a bad thing. I think that it's important for folks to do those check-ins with themselves, to think of like, what are these areas of privilege that I'm experiencing, and how can I leverage that in support of my colleagues or communities that I'm trying to be an ally to. So that's all it is.
Okay, you said that's all it is, but I have never thought about privilege in those terms. And you were right at the onset of your explanation about sometimes that word has like a different connotation to it. And so some of the things you described, every day we just sort of take it for granted, right? So really, that's very enlightening. I want to sort of move on to some characteristics that really distinguish an ally. So can you describe what those core characteristics of an ally are?
Sure, I can pull out a couple. And I
Okay.
think that the question that we just kind of worked through is a good foundation for the first one, and that's just self-awareness.
Okay.
I think that allies have to be aware of their own context. They have to do the work to unpack their own identities, their own bias, because that's another thing that we all have. We all have biases. And that exercise of doing that produces humility, that understanding of, you know what, this is my story, this is my context, but it's not the story, it's not the context. And so if you understand where you're coming from, it opens up your eyes to understand that there are other folks who may have a different experience, a different perspective to share. And that humility, and so that self-awareness brings humility. That's also a really key characteristic of allyship or being an ally. The next one is the ability to listen. Being a good listener, once you realize that your story is not the only story out there, you need to begin to absorb those stories from other folks, other identities, other communities with whom you want to be in partnership, but that you might not know the story or the history of that particular group or that particular individual. And that in hearing that gives you the opportunity to then amplify those stories, to share them with other folks who are on the same journey as you. And I probably have two more. The next one is courage. You have to have courage. I think that it takes a level of courage to even begin that self-examination and that self-awareness. It takes courage to confront your own biases, to think through the stories that you may have thought or the narratives that you believe that maybe you want to discard and you don't believe them anymore. It also takes courage to speak up in situations that you might encounter where there is bias at play, where there are instances of exclusion or discrimination or harm. And it also takes courage to accept correction when you need to. And I think we're going to talk about that a little bit more later, but the courage to take accountability for when you get it wrong. And then the last one is just advocacy or action. And again, to go back to Becky at the beginning, it's the action piece of being an ally is so important. I did a training a couple of years ago, and we talked about allyship specifically for the LGBTQ plus community. And there was a survey that was done by this organization. Whoa, what's it called? Allyship. And they did a survey of allies across the globe. Now, this was specific to LGBTQ plus allyship, but I think that it's relevant for this conversation. And in that study, they found that 49% of allies do not think that taking action is an important part of being an ally. And if you're not doing anything, like you're just a well-wisher, right? And if my house is on fire and you stand outside and you say, oh my God, I'm so against fire, and you don't grab a bucket or you don't grab a hose and help, or you don't help pull my kids out of that burning house, like you're not an ally in that situation. You are a well-wisher. You're giving me thoughts and prayers, but what I really need is someone to partner with me to put this fire out. And so advocacy is such an important part of the core characteristics of what allyship is.
So I think this is a really, really good topic regarding allyship, this whole definition. I have a follow-up question, but we've actually received a question that I think is really, it's really good to input it right now. And so how do you navigate a person who thinks they are an ally, but they really aren't? They really aren't. So you talked about a number of characteristics. You talked about action. So yeah, how do you navigate a person and they believe they're an ally, but they're not?
That is such a good question. And so
It is.
I want to think through how to answer this question with grace and thoughtfulness. And I also don't want to go too far ahead in the conversation, but I also feel like it's relevant. The idea of maybe performative allyship, it puts me in mind of, oh my gosh, this is not a political statement, but remember when the whole world was turned upside down and everyone was mourning the death of George Floyd, the murder of George Floyd, and remember that picture of Nancy Pelosi and the Congress Democrats kneeling in kente cloth? Lord, I think we can all agree that it was very cringe, but I also want to make space for the fact that many a well-meaning person who really cares, who wants to do the right thing, has been accused of performative allyship. And that's just the idea. Performative allyship is the idea that you're an ally in name only. You might make some type of symbolic gesture, turn your Facebook profile black, you might make a post about it, you might kneel in kente cloth, but that action piece is missing. And so to just tie that into the question of someone who thinks that they're an ally and they're not, the way that I would approach that is by making sure that I'm in community with that person. Being in community is so important in allyship and to be an effective ally. And you have to be in community with marginalized communities in order to be an effective ally. And just to be in community just means, hey, we're a group of people that have collective responsibility. We're working towards a common goal. And so if that person seems like they're an ally, but they're not, try to bring them into community. Like, hey, you say that you're an ally to Black folks in the workplace. Please come join our Black ERG. Sit in on these conversations, show up. And then if they do those things, right, they're coming into the room, they're maybe having a couple of conversations, then I might up the ante by saying, you know what, let me see if I can offer feedback in real time that will help you on your allyship journey. Hey, friend, whoever this person is, I know you joined our Black ERG, you've been showing up. Can I offer you a small piece of feedback about this thing that maybe a blind spot, or maybe an area that it would be so powerful if you would show up in this particular way, and offer that to them. See if they take it. If they don't, okay, now you understand what you're dealing with, right? This is a person who means well, right?
Right.
Who they're an aspiring ally. They're not there yet. And that's not at all to malign them or to disparage them. They're just not there yet. And then your job becomes leave them right where they are, right? You're there for, you're the cheerleader section, but then continue to find those people who are actually going to put their hands to the plow and to work with you. So give them a chance,
Yes.
extend the opportunity. If it doesn't change, leave them where they are, keep doing the work.
Yes. So we have a comment. Love your answer. Bring them in and not call them out. So that's awesome. Um, so as we're learning more about allyship in the workplace, I'm going to admit that some of my initial thoughts when I looked at really what an ally is and the actions that they take, some of my initial thoughts were, oh, there's a risk in being an ally. And you talked about courage, um, sort of enduring possible backlash, not only from their peers, maybe even from management. So, what are some of the common fears people have when trying to work as allies? What are
Yeah,
those
you just nailed one, Marcia, the fear of backlash. If I stick my neck out there, somebody's gonna chop it off, not to be too violent, or if I stick my foot out there, somebody's gonna step on it. I
Uh-huh.
also feel like a common fear is doing or saying the wrong thing. There's also a fear of doing too much. I've talked to so many allies, particularly, our white siblings who want to ally with, communities of color in the work of
Mhm.
racial equity or justice, whether it's in the workplace or out. And they're
Mhm.
like, you know what? I don't want to take up too much room. I don't want to take up too much space. And so they say nothing. And I understand that as a I understand that fear, especially in the digital age that we live in, and how prevalent social media is to how we consume information, how we process information, and how we think about things. Nobody wants to be called out on, Twitter or X, whatever they call it now,
Right,
or on
right.
Facebook for
X.
putting their foot in their mouth or stepping over the narratives of the folks that they're trying to be in allyship with. So those are some of the fears
Mhm.
that come along with being an ally. However, we go back to that courage
Right.
piece. Um, Nothing worth doing, everything has a cost, right? The good thing about the country that we live in is usually it's not going to cost you your life, right?
Right.
It's
Right.
not going to cause you physical, usually, right? And so usually the fears that we're feeling are social, they are relational. And that's not to say that they're not there, that they're not valid,
Mhm.
but assuming the risk, having the courage to face those fears, it's foundational to being an ally. And so the fears are there, but we have to work to overcome them.
You have to work through them. And um, I am a game show fanatic. So I'm telling you something about myself. And so there's a new game show out this season, and it's called The Flip Side. And it's a comedy game show, two teams of players, and they compete to guess how they would think about topics from two different people, two different groups of people.
Mhm.
So there's always the initial view, and then there's the flip side of the view. And so far, I'm really liking it. So on our topic today, let's flip and talk about some of the signs, or maybe even subtle signs that someone might need support. So this is someone who really needs an ally. So how can you identify someone who really needs an ally? And then how can that ally intervene appropriately?
That's a good question. I think that it's so situational.
Okay.
I think that it goes, okay, I've got a couple of different different paths off of here. So let me take one. I think that it goes back to the conversation that we had about mentorship and sponsorship.
Okay.
So let's say this is just one example, and I got another and I could circle back to if I remember it. But let's say you in the workplace, you see someone, a young woman who is not receiving the access to opportunities that it appears that her male counterparts are receiving.
Mm-hmm.
That's a cue right there. Something's up. So the first thing you need to do is address it on the systemic level, right? If you can, if you have the power to do so. Hey, there's a system breakdown here that's giving this the male colleagues in this instance access to opportunities over our female colleagues. So do that. But then maybe there is an opportunity for you to utilize the mentorship and sponsorship tools in your allyship toolkit to provide those resources to this female colleague of yours. So that's one way. But I do also want to talk about just the real instances that come up day to day of acts of exclusion, right? That you know they're wrong. You know it's wrong in this meeting for, and I hate to keep bringing it gender, but the examples are just so, fresh on top of my mind. But you know it's wrong for your male colleague to speak over and to drown out the voices of your female colleague. You know it's wrong for your colleague who is non-binary, who is constantly being misgendered by a certain individual in the workplace. And in those instances, you should practice speaking up in real time, right? I don't think it takes, a panel discussion for folks to know what's real and true in their heart. Since grade school, we've known, right? When there's something going on, when there's a bully, when there's a situation that's not quite fair, and take those opportunities to speak up in support. Now I'll give a third caveat. I feel like I'm talking too long, so feel free to cut me off.
No, keep going.
But it also goes back to the community aspect. And I have an example. So as you spoke about in my bio, in my job at Warner, I also work with our employee, we call them firm resource groups, but our employee resource groups. Yeah. And so we have Pride at Warner, shout out to PAW, which is our firm resource group for LGBTQ plus folks. And they meet once a quarter. And I remember having a conversation with the chairs of that group about their quarterly meetings. And I asked them, I said, again, because we're in community, because they hold me accountable, because we're working towards a common goal of, a more inclusive workplace at Warner and a safe space for our LGBTQ plus folks in the firm. And I asked them, I said, I'm feeling a little self-conscious about coming to your meetings because I feel like I'm taking up too much space. How would you like for me to show up, right? And I just put the ball in their court. Tell me what you need for me to do. How best can I support you? And what they said was, please can keep coming because it means something for you in your position to show up to these meetings. Now, what I could have done was to just say, you know what, I'm feeling self-conscious, I'm taking up too much space. I'm gonna leave that space just for our LGBTQ plus firm members so they can create a safe space and it's just for them. And had I not asked, I would have showed up in a way that was not beneficial to that community. And so having those conversations, asking folks, how do you want me to show up? It could be that your colleague, your female colleague that's getting spoken over in those meetings doesn't want you to say anything. She wants to handle it on her own because next time she's going to check everybody in the room, right? And what she needs for you to do is you sit there and not be the savior in that moment and let her assert herself. But having those conversations can also be helpful. So I went in on 3 paths. I said I was only going to do 2. Yes. But I hope that answered the question.
Yes, but there's more. I have a question that's really appropriate for, we're talking about the flip side of this and how do we really identify those that need an ally and what are some of those cues? And so this question is, how can you encourage people to self-identify their invisible different abilities so they may receive accommodations. So how can we encourage people to self-identify their invisible different abilities so that they can receive accommodations, or so that they can be, at the recipient of allyship?
So I'm thinking of the answer to this question a few different ways, as I do. But the way that it's phrased made me think of folks in the workplace who have disabilities and who need accommodations. And that's a very much of like a systemic or like a process related question. Um, and disclosing your need for accommodation if you have a disability under the ADA, right?
Yeah.
Which is very broad, has a lot of legal ramifications. So that's like something that's super
Mhm.
within the realm of responsibility for an HR department. And so sometimes folks put it in their applications.
Yes.
There are opportunities for you to disclose to your direct managers, to the HR department in general. And so I guess from an HR perspective, the way to do that is to let folks know that there's opportunities for them to disclose their disabilities. So that's a very structured question for HR professionals, and just a process related answer on that end. The other end of it is maybe taking it broader than folks who want to receive like a legal accommodation from their employer, and just folks in the workplace who may have a marginalized identity and they would at some point benefit from somebody allying with them. And I think that a good way to do that is to create safe spaces, like ERGs. We've been talking about that.
Yes.
Like we do town halls at Warner every quarter that are DEI specific, places for frank conversation, for learning, for growth.
Mhm.
And then I think there's another aspect of that would be to just incorporate those allyship behaviors into your core values as an organization across the board. And so it's not a specific thing that is related to, this small, hopefully not small, this large group of individuals in our workforce who are committed to being aspiring allies to folks in our community who have marginalized identities. But across the board, we have expectations of psychological safety and safe space. We have an expectation for our folks to speak up when they see something happening that's wrong. So incorporating some of those things into your core values as an organization, I think creates the environment that makes people be more comfortable to speak up, to disclose aspects of their identity that they wouldn't otherwise, and then to, I guess, signal to folks that, hey, there's an opportunity for community building and for allyship.
Yeah, and specifically, for clarification, the invisible meaning neurodiverse,
Mhm.
ADHD, depression, ASD. So,
Yep, and that totally fits into that too, and especially for my neurodiverse folks, because your girl is in that camp, right? Creating flexible working arrangements, reduced hours. In some law firms, we do that. I know we have that policy here at Warner for reduced hours. And also the culture that supports those people taking advantage of those. And basically to just widen the aperture of what's normal. I don't even like to use that word, but what's normal or what's usual around here. So you have ADHD and the light messes with your eyes and it doesn't help you focus, and you walk past somebody's office and they're sitting in complete darkness. That's normal around here because we give folks the flexibility to work in ways that feel good within limits, right? Not if somebody decides that they want to, work from home every single day, and you have a policy that you have to be in the office at least 2 days a week, then you might be going into like the HR legal accommodation space. But other than that, when there's no policy and it's just a cultural norm type of thing, to give folks the flexibility to do things that feel right for them, and to create a culture that really recognizes individuals and their needs to be themselves and to show up at work as their authentic self, and to give them the space to do their best work.
Awesome, awesome. You have just like peeled back layers regarding allyship already, and it's been so insightful. But it's also caused me to be reflective. It's taken me back to places, workplaces that I've been in, and I've asked myself, have I been an ally in the workplace? Have I? And the answer is yes, but I've thought about it because I didn't call it that at the time, right? And I thought about it, and so I must confess that I've erred. I have erred. And you talked about some mistakes earlier, and I have simply, Mandis, I have just messed up as an ally. Now that I am learning more about what that should be. So we're all human and we all need grace and learning. So how can we reframe mistakes, missteps as learning opportunities rather than barriers? How can we do that? While
That is
I'm sitting
such a
here
good
beating
question.
myself up.
That's such a good question. And everyone has gotten it wrong. Everybody. Even me, especially me. In fact, I've got 2 stories to share, and then I'm going to talk about some,
Not the
maybe
subject
like
matter expert. You have no.
I am not perfect, and I don't know everything that there is to know about every community, even those that I deeply, deeply want to support. So I'll give you 2 examples. One was I was on my way to speak at an event, and I was driving to the event. It was early in the morning, and I was kind of running through, my presentation notes, and I was so excited to hear the keynote speaker, who was a brilliant doctor from U of M, and I cannot remember his name. Dr. I cannot remember his name. I'll share it with Michaela and the folks at the Michigan Chamber, and I'll send it to you all afterwards. But he's a brilliant young Black doctor, and he uses a wheelchair. And so again, 2 things going on in my mind. Can't wait to hear this man speak, thinking about my presentation, and I'm getting to running through this icebreaker that I'm going to do. Very cool icebreaker. Use it all the time. And so the idea is I say a sentence, and if it's true for the group, then I give them 3 ways for either stand up or sit down. If it's true for you, stand up. If it's not true for you, stay sitting down. And so I'm thinking through this icebreaker. And I realize, oh my God, that is not an accessible icebreaker. I'm asking people to stand up or to sit down. What about people who physically cannot stand up? What about people who would rather not physically stand up? And I was just flabbergasted that here I am, DEI practitioner. I was asked to come to this event to speak on DEI, and I literally have an icebreaker that is not inclusive to differing abilities in that room. And so what did I do? In real time, I remix it in my mind. So now when I do that icebreaker, I give folks 3 ways, right? They can stand up if they'd like to. They can raise their hand, or they can just tell me. They can just say facts if it's true for them, right? So now that's an example of there was very low stakes for that. Nobody was in that car with me except for me. Now I share it because it's an opportunity to show folks that we all get it wrong, right? But in real time, nobody in that room knew that I was about to, be problematic and not inclusive with my icebreaker. Let me give you one more example about an opportunity or an instance where it was more public. So I was in a training shared with permission, by the way. I was in a training for facilitation, and this was a 3-day training. And over these 3 days, we had all virtual, but we had about 20 folks, and they're all DEI practitioners, and we had developed such a tight-knit community in those 3 days. It was a very intensive facilitation course. It was so hard. And we were all just rooting for each other, helping each other to process this new information that we were getting. And most of the people in the room were people of color, the virtual room. And so our instructor was telling us how to engage with folks who maybe are adverse to diversity, equity, and inclusion. They come into the room with the intention really to just derail the conversation. And so we're listening intently. We're all kind of typing in the chat. And one of my teammates, a white sister, types in like, yeah, sometimes you got to give them enough rope to hang themselves with. And immediately, my context as a Black woman and the historical connotations of being Black in this country, anything that talks about a rope and hanging people from trees is deeply upsetting to me.
Yes.
And I could see from the reactions on the faces of the folks that I was in the room with that it was deeply upsetting to them. And so I messaged my sister and I said, hey, ouch, that comment that get privately, right? Because you can do that on Zoom.
Right.
Ouch, that comment did not feel good. Immediately, she types back, thank you so much. She deletes it. She writes in the chat, hey, you all, just want to acknowledge that comment that I made was out of line. I've deleted it. Continues the conversation. And I think that lays out a really good process for us to follow. When we mess it up, when we step in it and we put our foot in our mouths, the first thing, thank the person who's in community enough with you, who values you enough, who's comfortable enough with you to say, hey, you messed that up. That hurt. You got that wrong, right? And it's a very subtle tweak from apologizing, right? Oh, I'm so sorry. Like, I didn't mean to do that. That's not what I mean. I'm such an ally to the Black community. Oh my God. Because when someone says sorry to you, what is your natural response? It's okay. It's okay. Sometimes it's not okay. Sometimes you really, really messed that up and you really hurt somebody and it's not okay. But by just making that subtle switch of thank you, you create space for that person to not have to soothe your hurt feelings or your embarrassment or whatever that you're rightfully feeling by messing this up. And it gives them the opportunity to then walk away. They heard me and we're gonna move on. The next step is if you need to, if it was public, acknowledge it. The same way that my sis did. Hey, y'all, I made a comment in the chat that was totally messed up. I deleted it. And then that was it. She totally continued interacting with us. Nothing about her demeanor changed. We didn't feel the need to soothe her feelings, to reassure her like, hey, girl, we know that you're still down. We know that you're not racist. None of that. She acknowledged it. She moved on. And then the next step is to process it, because sometimes you are embarrassed. You really feel bad. Go and process that with someone else that you're in community with. Usually it's probably going to, for my sis, another white person, right? Go find them and tell them, man, I really messed up today in a room full of people of color. And I said this insensitive thing about hanging folks or whatever. And process that and do the internal work that you need to get over that embarrassment, to reassure yourself that you're still committed to the work, and to get through some of that embarrassment and shame or whatever else that you're feeling. And then the next thing is just to go out and do better. She probably is never going to use that phrase again, right? And we all have those moments where we say something or we use a phrase or we do something, you're like, oh my God, I didn't even know that was offensive.
Right.
And the simple thing to do is just acknowledge it, take it out of your toolkit, take it out of your lexicon, go off and do better and be better as you continue on your journey as an ally.
So thank you for those examples. Those were it was a great way for us to understand what do we do in those cases. And so, Mandis, we are at sort of the time where we were going to open it up for questions. I have been infusing the questions as we've gone along. So I'm going to ask one question, and then I want to also pose a question that the audience member, and I've been saving it for the end. So you've talked about this. So how can organizations help employees understand the importance of allyship? And I had a question, let me see if I can find it here, where it says, what is the role of management in creating allies in the workplace? So hopefully you can pull those two together.
Yeah, for sure. For management, I think it goes back to maybe some of the themes that we've kind of talked about before, which is creating safe spaces, equipping folks with the tools that they need to be an ally, whether that's through education or training. And then if you're a manager, you have an incredible platform to model inclusive behavior and model allyship directly from your position. And so your team can see you doing those things, and they're going to follow your lead as they interact with their peers. And so if you're modeling inclusive behavior, if you're making sure that you're creating a safe team in all ways to all different identities, if you're speaking up when something that's within your purview or within your scope of responsibility is can be tweaked to be more inclusive or more equitable to folks across identities in your workplace, that you're taking those opportunities to do that. And so really, as a team lead, it's embodying those principles of allyship yourself and then modeling that for your team and setting the culture, the cultural expectation that they do those things, and then giving them the tools to do so. So some folks need additional training. Some folks need a very clear expectation that's delivered to them, or a standard to meet. So using some of those things would be a good way to model that or to incorporate that as a manager or a people leader.
So I believe earlier you've all along our conversation have talked about the tools to create allies in the workplace or in life. Can you just review what are some tools that we can put in our tool belt or in our toolkit to create allies in the workplace or in general?
Absolutely. And so the first one personally is that self-awareness work, that examination of your own biases, the inner work that's needed for you to undertake this work. The next one is about education, that goes hand in hand with the examination of your own inner world and your own biases, providing education for folks, and also safe space for folks from marginalized identities and their allies to get together, to talk, to strategize. Sometimes that's scary for us as, folks on the administrative side. Like, what are they in there doing, right? They're coming together to change the world and to change this organization, and you should let them do that, within limits, right?
Sure.
So the education piece, and then practice speaking up. Maybe even in your own head, like, what would you do if somebody says this? I'm going to say that, right? So that you can be prepared when you do inevitably witness, whether it's intentional and it's like egregious, more likely it's something that someone is not aware of. But when you witness those acts of exclusion, how are you going to step up? How are you going to be an active ally in those moments? So continue to practice, continue to be active in your allyship, and bolster that with lots of education, lots of training, lots of listening, and safe space creation.
Awesome. Mandis, oh my gosh, I hate this that our time is up. I have so enjoyed this conversation, and not only enjoyed it, I have learned so much from it. I want to thank the Michigan Chamber for all their hard work for pulling this event together. So valuable. And I want to thank all the attendees, not only for your attention, but for your questions, for your comments, and just interacting and being interactive. And then I want everyone to join me in thanking Mandis McCallender for being McAllister for being with us today and sharing her subject matter expertise. So with that, I will turn it back over to Becky Bertka.
Thank you both. Just thank you so much. You are incredible volunteer leaders, and thank you all for joining us today for this important conversation on allyship in the workplace. We explored many key aspects of what it means to be an ally today, in today's evolving professional environment. And from identifying an ally as someone who's actively supporting and advocating, to understanding those core characteristics that distinguish authentic allyship, I think we've all gained very valuable insights on how each of us can contribute more to those inclusive spaces. So wrapping up, I just want to make one more special thank you to our incredible sponsors and their support of our collective DE&I journey this year. We've had 3 amazing webinars with tough topics ranging from disability advocates to cultivating uniqueness and now to allyship. Each of these conversations took us out of our comfort zone and shared a vulnerability that is begged of leadership. And that program transcends DEI. It hosts conversations that relate directly to cultivating leaders wherever they are in our workplaces and our communities. So with that, I would like to again thank Dow for supporting our program as a platinum sponsor this year. And also a very special thank you to the Michigan Bankers Association, the Michigan Bankers Association Workers' Compensation Fund, and CATA for their continued support. As we wrap up the series this year, we also have a new opportunity for all of you who are interested in a new series through the Michigan Chamber Foundation. More to come, but I'm pleased to share a sneak peek today. In 2025, we'll be folding the DEI programs that we have currently into our comprehensive MyBiz Talent and HR series, featuring a variety of educational webinars, SHRM and HRCI continuing education credits, and more opportunities for professional growth on your journey. These series will focus on human resource topics, operational support, talent retention like this, and so much more. So we hope you'll stay tuned as we roll out this opportunity in 2025 with webinars and in-person events as well. I look forward to those continued conversations and seeing all of you on our upcoming webinars. So later today, you'll also receive an email survey from us, but just taking a time to share your thoughts on today's event will help us tailor this top-notch programming into the future and into 2025, specifically for you. Your input is so invaluable, and we appreciate your feedback in helping us grow. So as I conclude, I just want to leave you with that encouragement that allyship is an ongoing journey, and that, as Manda said, we all screw up. Continuous learning, reflection, and engagement are absolutely vital, and remaining open to new perspectives and staying committed to personal growth, each of us can contribute to this lasting change in our workplace and beyond. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your questions and your dedication to making Michigan's business community and our world a more inclusive place. So with that, we'll see you all in 2025.